Alrighty, so today the focus is on literary conflict in our text. So I'm hoping this might be a super long one, and just kind of touching on some things, then moving on to a little bit of essay question work around conflict. So not too demanding on you to go back and find quotes and things like that today. So a little bit simpler than some previous lessons. So typically, when you look at literary conflict, there are three main literary conflicts. So, conflict obviously just meaning two things against each other. And what's really important to think about is how those two things don't need to be both physical, human things, they can be wider than that. So, that's something that we want to try having a look at today and talking about that. So if you've got two things against each other, these are the three main types. So you typically have a man versus man conflict. So this is two people having a conflict, or two or more people having a conflict. This can be obviously physical, but it can also just be an emotional or a mental disagreement. So you might find yourself having a physical conflict with your siblings, but you might find yourself having a mental conflict with a teacher you disagree with. Man versus self is inner turmoil or inner conflict. So this is something where your morals are put at play. So you see somebody hitting somebody else at school, and you could do something about it, or you could not do something about it. Additionally, it might be something where you're not sure about yourself and your identity and things like that. So man versus self is inner conflict. And then the third most popular or common one is man versus nature or environment or society. So those are the three traditional literary conflicts. Now, if you look at literary conflicts, yeah, it's hard to say, over time or online, you'll find that there's actually quite a range. Some people think there's seven, there's nine. It's all up to interpretation. What we're going to actually look at today is a kind of fourth one. So those are your three typical ones, but this is a big one. So man versus technology. Now you could argue that this comes under man versus environment because their environment's created by the technology in it. So that's up for discussion and up for debate. But over time, as obviously technology's developed in such a meaningful and really relatively quick space of time, this has become a more common conflict, literary conflict. All you have to do is think of the Terminator. You know, that was one of the very early man versus technology kind of battles that was going on. So, how do we see that in There Will Come Soft Rain? So, this is up for debate. So, the conflict between man and the future they create through technology. So, the conflict between what man thought they were getting and what actually happened. The conflict where there is a nuclear warfare situation created by man. So man created that technology and now it's come back to bite them. This is another one that I don't know if we'll get to touch on so much, but the remnants of man, which is in theory the house, conflicting with the environment, which is the tree, which results in the fire. So I'm going to look at that. I think one of the later slides on in a different light, so don't get too wound up in your head about that. The simplest way to think about man versus technology as a conflict in our text is how are there moments where technology and the humans that were meant to be there or not there now having an issue. So what I'm going to do is show you on the next slide some examples of those. You can come up with some yourself if you want. So if you kind of get this and it makes sense to you, just pause the video now, write man versus technology, and think, what are some examples of that conflict that I see in my text right now? If you have no clue, stick around. I'll flick the slide and you can just copy them down. So, examples of man versus technology in our text. This is not a comprehensive or complete list. This is me doing the best from my memory and just flicking through the text kind of quickly. So you might have other ones, and that is totally fine. If you're not entirely sure, just check in. So, cooking breakfast for no one. This shows man versus technology as a conflict because man that was meant to be there is no longer there, and the technology has effectively won in that situation. Descriptions of their environment. So there's a couple towards the beginning of the text about the rubble and things like that. That shows a conflict with man and technology because now man's not there and technology has ruined everything. So in this sense, we're thinking about technology not just being the house as a item of technology, but the development of nuclear warfare and the allusions to that. So that's where that contextual understanding is really important, and the fact that this is written post World War II is really important. The description of human imprints or silhouettes. Control F to find the word silhouette, and that will show you the bit that I mean in the story. So this is really important to show that that was man, and then the imprint is what is left from their interaction with technology. So if you think about conflict as an interaction, so the dog, it's a last living reflection of mankind, or man or human. It's man's best friend. That's why there's a dog as opposed to a cat. It dies, so there goes with it man. And then on top of that, technology overrules and rids of him. So they burn him, they incarcerate him. Not incarcerate, that means jail. Incinerate him. That's what happens. The child's room, so that's meant to reflect. There's like a really big paragraph describing all the animals, and then there's another paragraph later when the fire happens. That's all kind of meant to have this imagery of innocence of life that's been taken away by the selfishness of man. So there is this beautiful children's room. Children are a reflection of innocence and purity, and yet it's empty and there's no one there. And then at the end, when the thing's on fire, it's almost like the room tries to respond to it, because men are terrible and they're ruining, not men, mankind are terrible and they're ruining everything for the innocence or the future, which is what childs represent. The empty chairs in the evening, the fact that no one's there for the cigar and the martini. Ultimately, when you think about this as a conflict, so conflict is an interaction, generally a negative or a clashing interaction. Is technology the winner at the end of the day? So that's up to you to have a think about. So what I would do is, if you can't follow along and listen and write and do all that quickly, because I do talk quickly, take a pause and pause the video and copy down these examples that I have of man versus technology. If you have your own, winner, chicken dinner, well done. If you don't, get those down. And if you've got them down, you have some others that you can think of now that it's been prompted, then you write them down. So think about it. Conflict is just disagreement between two things. This story clearly shows a disagreement between man and the technology that they created, and these are examples in the text that I think shows that. So have a pause, and then we'll move on to the next one when you're ready. Also worth considering. So in that first slide, what I talked about is that you can consider man versus technology a man versus environment conflict. But I think it's easy just to think about it as man versus technology, and don't let that environment one throw you around, because it's kind of hard to understand. So instead, what might be worth considering, you wouldn't get as much ability to come up with as many examples for this conflict, which is why I'm focusing more on man versus technology. But it's worth knowing. You might end up wishing to do a paragraph on this kind of conflict instead. So what's worth considering is nature versus technology. So there's very clearly a battle between nature through the tree creating fire and the fire that's created, and the technology trying to save the house. That happens. That's probably the last third of the text is really focused around that. So it's definitely a conflict that can't be ignored. So the tree falls, tree is nature, which sparks a fire, and that's a conflict, and it's ruining the house, and the house is trying to battle, and so back and forth and back and forth. The birds living, earlier in the text talks about how the house has like a paranoia and shuts its blinds when the birds come there, but that just gives us an idea that even in the rubble, even in the fact that the humans can't exist and everything's terrible, there are still birds. So nature lives on, which is a perhaps allusion to the poem There Will Come Soft Rains, about how the fact that nature lives on even after the war has damaged the land. So worth considering. The house, which is a representation of technology, despite all the technology it has, it kind of can't overcome nature. So the house burns to the ground. There is one eerie line at the end of the text where the house, whatever is left, keeps going and keeps talking. Does that tell us that technology lives on? Does it tell us technology is trying to live on? That conflict between that and nature, the artificial world and the natural world, and that dilemma. So that's really one worth considering. I'm not going to go into too much more detail on that. That's kind of where it's at. But if you like that idea, if it vibes with you and you can see it and you can understand it, most definitely reflect on that further and go further with that. So what I've got are just 3 conflict essay questions, just to show you kind of what the questions are, what they could look like, and how that would link to what we've got. Okie dokie. So what you're going to do is I'm going to read them and you're going to pause and copy them down. And then what you're going to do is just circle or highlight the keywords. So the keywords, remember, are what are you being asked to talk about? And those keywords would feature at least twice in every main body paragraph that you do. So, question number 1, describe at least one significant conflict in the text. Explain how that conflict helped you to understand an idea. The second question, describe one interesting relationship in the text. Explain why that relationship was interesting to you. And finally, describe a conflict which appears in the text. Explain how that conflict helped you to further understand the text. So what you're going to do, as I've said, is you pause the video, write those down, and highlight or circle or underline the keywords in each of those questions. Cool. Here's something I prepared earlier. So this is where I've just highlighted those keywords for you. So significant conflict, understand an idea. Interesting relationship, interesting to you. Conflict which appears, further understand. So the reason I've got them in yellow and green is just to remind you that there are 2 parts to each question. So you have a describe part and an explain part. And I've mentioned it before, but the best possible essay responses have both describing and explaining in a fairly balanced equation. Okay, so if you were to highlight how much of your text answer is yellow, describing, and how much is green, you kind of want a 50-50-ish. Otherwise, I would say maybe like 60% explanation and like 40% description. To recap verbally, just quickly, description comes from using the yellow keywords, so the keywords from that first part of the question. It comes from describing the event where the text, where the example takes place. So you say, during this event, we see, and it comes from use of evidence. That's how you describe. You explain through analysis of language, linking to the second part of the question, and it's not director, that's the film, author's purpose. Those are all explanatory details. Okay, so there's 2 parts to the equation. Technically, they kind of come first half of the paragraph, second half of the paragraph, roughly, but often we have 2 pieces of evidence, so there's a sneaky bit of description that comes halfway through as well. Okay, so those are the 3 essay questions, those are the keywords. If you haven't got them, get them. What I'm going to do for you in a moment on the next 3 slides is I'm just going to explain what you would do potentially for the second part of that question, because that can be a bit that throws us. We get used to using the keywords, but we don't actually unpack what we're being asked to do. So the next 3 slides just focus on that. So make sure you got the keywords and then tune on in. So looking at that first question, a significant conflict and an idea. So a significant conflict is man versus technology. An idea is whatever you want it to be. Okay, so that is the best way to think about essay questions, is how can it work with what I understand. So an idea might be the infallibility of man or the fallibility of man. An idea might be man's selfishness has led to their demise. A more simplistic idea, man is not always powerful. That's an idea that you get. So you look at man versus technology, you go back to the previous 3 slides back and you have an example and you say, this example is a conflict, here's the evidence, this shows me the idea that man's not always powerful. Or this nice simple one at the end here, technology, oh, I've got a typo. Technology may be our downfall. May. Got too caught up in my men and my mans and my everything. Goodness. So to unpack that, you write about how it helps you understand an idea. An idea can be a theme, it can be a word, it can be a sentence, it can just be a concept that you want to talk about. So those are examples of what they are, and you can argue them. So, is man infallible? Are they fallible? What does fallible mean? Fallible means that they're capable of making mistakes, and fallible means that they are bulletproof. So is man bulletproof or not bulletproof? You discuss if you did that. Second question. This is a hot mess. Interesting relationship and why it's interesting to you. So I put this one in there just to remind you that conflicts are relationships. They're just negative ones. So what's good about learning a conflict is that it works for a conflict question and it works for a relationship question. So an interesting relationship is obviously the relationship between man and technology. So it's not a conflict, it's a relationship. Relationship's just a connection. It's a negative one. But the interesting to you part can sometimes throw you, and you can refuse to acknowledge it in your discussion, and that's going to limit your response to an achieved. So what it means by interesting to you, it might be interesting to you because it makes you reflect on an idea. See the previous slide. It might be interesting because it connects to you in your life. So this is interesting when I see I'm trying to think of the examples that I have. This is interesting when you see the breakfast preparing it for nobody, because it shows that the relationship is negatively balanced because they're doing this and they're not doing this. This connects to me as I often wonder if I didn't have a phone, what would my life be? Or if I didn't exist, would phones still be popular? I don't know what goes through your head. That might be you. It might be interesting to you because through that relationship, you reflected on the characterization of the house and the fact that the house is basically alive. And you thought that was interesting to discuss because it makes us reflect on whether technology is alive, whether robots are their own beings, or whether it's just us controlling them. What happens when we're not there to control them? That really made you think based on the characterization of the house. It was interesting to you because it made you reflect on the role of technology in your life, in the wider world. It is interesting to you because of any reason you decide it's interesting. You might say it's interesting to you because it makes you think about a theme. It can be that simple, but it's really important that you give a stated reason why it's important and interesting. You don't have to genuinely find that interesting, but for the sake of your hour of essay writing in an exam, you're going to pretend that it is so interesting. Okay? Conflict, which helps you further understand the text. So this one's a classic that comes up at year 11, this further understand the text. So I thought I'd bring it up and bring up what further understand the text means. So the conflict, man versus technology. Shocker. What further understand means. So further understands means something like it helps you see ideas or themes, and that helps you understand the text and what the author's purpose was. It made you reflect deeper on the focuses of the text around technology and the role of technology and the power of man, the fallibility of man, or the infallibility of man. It helps you reflect on messages about humanity and where we stand and how we seek technological development, anything like that. So basically what it means by further understand the text is how did that conflict and the events that take place in that conflict, so events that show man versus technology having a conflict, how did that help you think about the text in a deeper manner? So yes, you could see the conflict because there was rubble everywhere, and that shows man had a terrible time and created something bad. But how would that help you understand the text further? Well, it makes you think about how man ultimately killed themselves through their technology creation. And then why is that important? Well, it makes you think about who's more powerful, man or the technology they create. So see how that helps you further understand the text because you've unpacked it further. Okay, that's what that effectively means. Further understand, how did it make you think more? Did it show you an idea? Did it show you a theme? Did it make you reflect on a setting? Did it show you the author's purpose? How did it do that? How was that conflict a tool or a vehicle to your further understanding? Cool. So now that I've unpacked those, what you can do now is possibly listen to this whole video again, mainly just to laugh at me not being able to put words together. Or you can choose an essay question from an earlier slide and write a plan. Just what would you write about for paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. Bonus points if you put in evidence. You could choose an essay question from the earlier slide and write an introduction and a body paragraph, and you could totally email that to me, and then I could see it and be like, wow, here's some feedback. Go onto YouTube and type in literary conflict and find a decent looking video to watch. There's one that's about 7 different types of literary conflict using TV shows as examples, which is all right. It's about 9 minutes long. You could reflect on your conflict or relationship with technology. What role does it have in your life? Have a think about that for 40 minutes. Or you can do that same thing and then write a paragraph about it, or discuss with someone at home. If you have somebody at home, which most of you do at the moment, say to your mum or dad or cousin or sister or dog, what are your thoughts on technology and how you use it in your life? I think right now is really interesting as a time to do that. I can't find that like bit of my phone that tells me my screen time. But the other day, one of my friends messaged me and said her screen time was at 8 hours, like a working day was spent on her phone, and I watched like 3 TV series, so I sympathise with that greatly. So there's what you do. There's our lesson. Now you know what conflict is. You know some examples of man versus technology as a conflict in our text. You've seen some essay questions, and you'd see what I mean by the second part of the question. That's our lesson. Adios.